Hello and welcome to another video and podcast from fantasyfootballscout.co.uk. My name is David and today we are doing yet another FPL team reveal as Game Week 1 beckons, and I am joined by a very familiar face in Az, a Blackbox star, formerly video editor at Fantasy Football Scout as well. So a man who knows what it means to do my job on a day-to-day basis. So there's lots of things we could talk about today, Az, but we're going to talk about your team primarily. How are you doing?
I'm good. I can't see you on Zoom, which is already, giving me chills because I remember I used to start with that until I found a way to do it. But it's fine, I'm not gonna hear micromanage you. It's all good. Do it how you want.
He's not
No,
going to micromanage me. That's good.
no, all good, all good. My team is not settled in any way, so I think the team reveal term is a bit loose for this one. But hopefully I can offer some reasoning behind some of my picks because I'm already getting some stick for some of them. So be interesting to see what you say.
You know what? It really wouldn't be an FPL preseason without you specifically getting stick for your opinions, because you do like a spicy opinion, don't you, Az?
Yeah, the trouble is I double down on them. There's people that come in and say, "Oh, you're not going to start with that play, you're not going to do that," and that just feeds into it more, and I end up, starting with players that I probably shouldn't do. But that's what I love about Game Week 1. It's trying to find that player, isn't it? Or those couple of picks that just go against the ones that everyone's got to try and get ahead. At the start, it doesn't always work out like that. Often you can end up behind and scrambling around to try and get the template picks. But you've got to have one or two players in your team who you're actually a little bit excited about, I think.
I mean, that is something that very much is part of the Az branding, because, that is everybody knows what Az means. Az comes to the party, you know what you're going to get. You got to have some picks that are a little bit more exciting than just to do with numbers and covering this and covering that. So I'm looking forward to seeing who you got on your team. I know it's going to be a spicy one. You've already been teasing some of it on social media as well. We should also just point out, by the way, Az is actually quite good at FPL. He's not just the guy that walks in with, spicy picks everywhere and, open up a spicy food restaurant. He's finished in the top 5k 4 times. So yeah, any particular tips that have helped contribute to that, do you think? Any sort of recurring themes for your most successful campaigns?
Yeah, I mean my finishes have been sort of quite decent, I'd say, kind of throughout the years of playing, but they do vary quite a lot. The last 3 seasons I've had 2 finishes in and around sort of 150k, and then before that I had like a 15k finish and a 4k finish. So I'm kind of a bit up and down, but that is kind of how I like to play the game. I'd rather be pushing for the bigger finishes and be in and around the top 5k than kind of plateauing out and finishing, I don't know, 60, 70, which are still good ranks, and I don't blame people for doing that, but I like to kind of push a little bit more, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But in terms of strategies, I just do my research and try my best to back things that I'm seeing on the pitch and in the stats. And it's worked well last few years. You just have to look at the wall sort of behind me. The likes of Porro came through in the end last year. Reece James, I got on him before. Mitoma again last season. That's not me blowing my own horn, because there's been plenty of players that have been absolutely awful. Ceballos rings a massive bell. I was going absolutely mad about him, and it doesn't work out. But to me, that's what FPL is about: backing yourself, doing your research, and trying to find those players that the models and other people are being a bit kind of reluctant to take a punt on.
Yeah, and of course that attitude got you to 817th, I think it was, in the world in 17-18 season. I suppose the big question is, what do you say to the people that say you're still dining out on that?
I would say you're right. That was an amazing season, because that was Brighton's first year in the Premier League. So it was my best season in FPL. I had the ID of 69 as well, and I got my best finish. So what more can you ask for out of those three? But yeah, I mean, things, sometimes things just go your way, and the picks you make come in, and you end up building value. Then at the end of the season, your team has more value in it than others, and that can help. Doesn't always help, but it can help with kind of free hits and choices and things like that. And there's often like a few key game weeks in the week, and if you can kind of do quite solidly throughout most, and then really nail the big weeks, the free hit weeks or the bench boost weeks or something like that, then you end up having a really good season. So a lot of luck that year, but yeah, that was a particularly good year, that one.
I mean, I have to say, to anyone who says FPL is not scripted, I mean, come on. ID of 69, Brighton's first year in the Premier League, and you finish 817th. I mean,
I know.
Well, I mean, I'm just asking questions, you know. Like,
I know. It was written in the
knows?
stars. Written in the stars that season. Yeah.
If a sitcom series was an FPL season, it would be that for sure. So yeah, but of course, you know, you've obviously had a lot of in terms of assessing an FPL season, you've done it kind of as someone who started off as a fan, just kind of FPL content, and you're very much sort of in and around Fantasy Football Scout in a kind of moderator sense, and then you get thrust into the limelight on the Scoutcast, and now of course you do Blackbox on a weekly basis with Mark as well. He's actually signed in on Zoom. It came up, it said Mark Suddens. I got very excited, and then it was just Az.
And you're me. And I'm me on Zoom.
I'm still you. It still says Az at Fantasy Football Scout, but
my legacy lives on.
There we are. But that's all part of my other question. Is that you, again, I suppose a bit like me, have kind of had this dynamic of going through fantasy football and changing how your life interacts with it in some way. And I think sometimes we can forget about that. We're all sort of interested in, you know, this player, that player. But yeah, I mean, what's that been like in terms of that journey? And I suppose now it's kind of gone in the opposite direction for yourself, because you now full time you're not in FPL anymore. Has this preseason been a bit different for you? Have you been able to sort of assess things in a more at a distance way? Does that help? Does that hinder you? Like, what's that been like?
I think it's a lot being in the kind of role that you're in and being full time at Scout. And I was there for 2 years, and you know, really enjoyed being part of the team. But I did find that kind of merging the hobby and the career was quite difficult. And Mark had the same when he was doing FPL stuff, you know, for the official FPL and trying to manage Scout and things. And you know, it can be quite taxing, which is stupid really, because it's fantasy football and it's a stupid game at times, and you're just moving shirts around a screen and all that. But when it becomes your kind of life and you're doing content every day, and you know, I think at the moment on Twitter I'm seeing, you know, content creators getting quite a lot of stick from people, but you know, you've got to remember these people are doing something they're passionate in. It's not easy making these videos and trying to think of content and trying to be different to everyone else is often tricky, especially when a lot of the people watching do want team selection videos and team reveal videos. So there's always a trade-off between trying to do something innovative and trying to give people kind of what they want and what gets views. So yeah, it's a tricky balance. I've really enjoyed this preseason, though, I have to say. I think I've taken a bit of a step back from things. I've been watching loads of preseason games. I've really enjoyed the summer series, for example, Newcastle, Chelsea, you know, Brighton playing in that, Premier League teams versus Premier League teams. I think it's been a really good addition to it. And I've just been tinkering with my team, but not having to worry about, you know, showing my team on every stream that I'm doing and that. I kind of can just leave it for a few weeks and kind of assess how it changes. So yeah, it's been a fun preseason, but I am concerned that normally by this point I've got a pretty strong idea of what I want to, who I want going into the season. And this year I literally, there's about 6 or 7 spots which could end up changing in my side. So yeah, it'd be interesting to talk about it.
Yeah, that's what we want to hear. We want to hear about dilemmas and coin flips and
so many
dice rolls.
Some people seem so like locked in with their teams, you know, and haven't changed them, done one draft, and they can't see themselves changing. And I'm just the complete opposite of that.
A couple more difficult questions to clear up before we get into the nitty gritty. What do you say to the conspiracy theory that me and you aren't friends anymore because I, quote, stole your job?
Yeah, well, it's actually in my Pro Pundit contract that I have to do this video with you. So we'll just leave it there.
Very nice, very nice. And I suppose the one final conspiracy theory, what do you say to the people who think we're not friends anymore because I famously took you off the pitch at Gameweek 39 in the first season, which robbed you of the opportunity to get a clean sheet? Are you over that yet? I'm
over that one. We won that game. You know, that you had to, you know, it's what you get paid for, to make the big calls. I'm still not over finding out from Hindu Monkey that I was benched in the last game. So yeah, we'll talk about that off air.
So to conclude, mine and Az's friendship is in a really good place. As you can tell. It's in a really
all
really
is
good
fine.
place.
All is fine and well. Yeah.
Well, let's move on to some other dilemmas then. Never look at your team in its current form, and we have to start in the very obvious place, which you've already teased on social media, of course. That no Brighton attackers. What's going on?
Yeah, it's a tough one because obviously Brighton have got an incredible run of games early on. You know, Luton at home and Wolves. I mean, they're two teams I'm tipping for relegation. Sometimes we see promoted teams starting strongly, and Luton had a good defence last year. And I think we should win that game, you know, sort of fairly comfortably. It's a really tough game for them to come to first. My issue isn't so much with our kind of performances in those games, whether I think we'll win, lose, or draw. I'm a bit concerned that we've lost McAllister and Colwill, and there's all these things about Casado. I think that does harm us. But we made some decent signings in Dahoud and Pedro coming in, so I think we'll perform well. So my kind of hesitancy to recommend a Brighton player isn't anything to do with the fact that I think we're going to struggle in these games. My worry is that Mitoma has been a frustrating asset for us for quite a while. He came into the team, burst into the team really strongly, sort of after the World Cup last year. Had a really great purple patch where he was scoring incredible goals, really good stats. He was 5 million at the start of the season, and then kind of made a mockery of that tag. But then towards the end of the season, he really did dip off, and I do think a big part of it was the fact that teams kind of just worked him out. He's got he's an incredible dribbler, but he's as I kind of there's a good thread on Twitter about him. He's got this move which is he gets the ball, he holds it up, sudden explosion of pace, cuts the ball back, or drills it across the penalty area for either a tap in or someone on the edge of the area to kind of strike it in. And he hasn't really been scoring many goals at all himself. He's becoming more and more reliant on that move and other people to kind of finish it. And I just wonder if that is enough. When I'm looking at the midfield, looking at the amount of options we have in midfield, is that really enough to say that he's going to be a player who, because I think there's going to be 6.5, 7.5 million midfielders who over the first 5 or 6 game weeks could get a goal or an assist in almost every game they play. Do I think Mitoma is capable of reliably returning? He hasn't done it yet. He's chipped in with a couple of assists pre-season, but he's not really that like talismanic figure for Brighton. He hasn't got the set pieces. He hasn't got penalties, obviously. And players like Mbomo have. He's playing for a team in a bit of transition as well. So that's why I'm put off him. And then I look at all the other assets and I just don't know who's going to start for us. Buonanotte's been playing. So does that mean March is a bit of risk? Is Pedro going to come straight in the team? Does he go with like a Welbeck, a Ferguson, Enciso? Where does he play into this? We've got so many attacking options. So it's Mitoma or no one for me. And I just look at the options we have from some of the teams like Man City and Arsenal and United and think if I can have 5 players from those 3 teams, is there really room for a Brighton attacker? That's my thoughts anyway.
Yeah, well, no, it's really interesting you say that about Mitoma because I currently have him actually, but it's more of a placeholder for whichever Brighton midfielder I decide I'm going to go with. I think I'm going to take not risk, I suppose, because maybe it's a risk. I don't know. You've laid out some genuine concerns about them. For me, it's more just about the fixtures. I am looking at my Brighton midfielder being someone I jump off maybe game week 3 into a Spurs midfielder or a Chelsea midfielder or something like that. That's my thinking there. But I didn't put Mitoma in when I did my first draft. I went for Gross. And the reason why I went for him was obviously he is probably highest for expected minutes, probably because he can play in a number of different positions. But it was more what you said there was that Mitoma felt like he'd maybe become a little bit one-dimensional in his attacking play. And some of the stats that I'd seen kind of helped lend some credence to that because he was still actually getting lots of shots, but his shots on target plummeted in the last 10 games of the season. His goal conversion went down to about, I think it was like something like 7% for quite a prolonged period towards the end of the campaign. And so I think people were perhaps maybe still dining out on the fact that he'd done well up until that point, maybe didn't want to sell him. And with a completely fresh and clean slate at the start of the campaign, I wasn't entirely sure that I wanted to rely on a player that seemingly forgot how to score over quite a prolonged period towards the end of last season. And before I go any further, the stats that I got from that, of course, we're all in the Fantasy Football Scout members area, so just a quick little interlude. If you've not sorted out a membership for the start of the new season, then now is a good time to do it. You can save up to 30% on those preseason prices. And if you want to find out the answer to what went wrong with Mitoma towards the end of last season, go and have a look in there. You can customize the tables and the comparison tools to give you some of that information. And yeah, certainly what I've seen in there sort of dovetails quite nicely with what you've seen specifically on the pitch in terms of the actual eye test. So I totally understand that, actually, to be honest. And as
the thing is, he's
said,
not a bad option. He's not. Yeah. I'm not saying he's a bad option and you shouldn't start with him. I think he should do well. The fixtures are really nice. We're a very attacking team. I expect us to score goals. It's just when I look at the midfield and the fact you can fill it with Arsenal, United, and City players, I expect those teams to score more goals in those games. And I think the players, particularly Rashford and Fernandes and Saka, are the kind of the main men in those sides. Foden's a little bit dodgy, and I'm sure we'll come on to Havertz in a bit. I mean, one of those two could end up moving down to Mitoma. I'm not completely ruling it out, but they're in it for the moment.
Well, I think the bottom line is, I think I saw you tweet the other night when someone wondered if maybe it was the real as, maybe you were sending some emergency message that you needed help. That you said that what they could do is send you undeniable evidence that Mitoma is essential. And really, that's your point, isn't it? Is not a bad option, but is he essential? No, I suppose. Nobody is really. Well, sorry, apart from the obvious massive Norwegian. But there isn't really an essential midfielder this year, which I suppose is, Salah used to be, isn't anymore, right? Not on your team.
Yeah, I mean, Salah's obviously the big one. I mean, I haven't even considered going without Rashford or Saka. There is no essential, and maybe you can cover Rashford with Bruno, maybe you can cover Saka with one of the other Arsenal mids. But I'm just not willing to do that. I think those three, along with Haaland, I just think they're good prices and good fixtures, and they just do everything that I want from kind of fantasy picks, set pieces, some penalties from Saka, the form that Rashford was in towards the end of last season. So those three are just locks. Salah's obviously the big one, but I just look at those first three games and think it would be very different if the fixtures were kinder. For Liverpool, I think we'd see him in a lot more teams. I think we'd see him in a lot more teams if Bournemouth at home was game week 1 fixture. I think people would be a lot more willing to risk him. But because it's in game week 2, and when you set up your team, you don't see Liverpool with Bournemouth at home. You see them with Chelsea away. It's not as pleasing, when you're looking at a draft. Whereas if it was Bournemouth, I do wonder if he'd be more, which isn't really the best way to think about it. And what happens if Salah does score 2 goals against Chelsea? Are we going to suddenly see a huge surge in his ownership? We probably are, but that's not necessarily the best way to play it. But in all honesty, I haven't made a draft with Salah. Not one that I've played around with it, but not one that I've actually contemplated going with. I just think the sacrifices you have to make in the rest of your team is too much. And if you look at my midfield in this is all 8.5-ish million players. And being able to get 5 of those, all from probably 3 of the top 4 teams in the league, no-brainer for me.
Yeah, it's definitely looking very, very powerful in that midfield. And I suppose the double up on Bruno and Rashford, I think, is the one I find the most compelling from a potential differential kind of way of thinking, because a lot of people are going either or, and you're just going, is it too much to ask for both? And you've got them both. Is that influenced? Are you really, really confident in the United attack? Are you just interested in those price points? Are you interested in those players? Lots of people have different... I've seen a couple of double-ups here, and each one has a different thinking behind it. I wondered which of the camps motivated you to have this double-up.
I'm not totally sold on Fernandes, if I'm being honest. I've struggled with him in previous seasons. He can go for long spells, not scoring returns, and then suddenly come in with a big haul where he takes a penalty and gets max bonus and maybe gets an assist as well. He's got that in him because he's got that bonus point potential. But if the fixtures weren't as kind, there's no way I'd be going to double up, because I'm definitely not in the camp that Manchester United are a really potent attacking force. Obviously got this new striker coming in. I think he's going to take a bit of time to adapt. He's only young as well. He's going to have to learn to a very intense way of playing, and a very particular way in which Ten Hag wants his striker to kind of function, which actually differs from where he was at in his last cover. He'd like to kind of go into the channels a bit more. He's going to have to be much more holding the play up, bringing other players in, and there's going to be an adjustment because it's a difficult role to suddenly come into a top performing Premier League side and be expected to not only score goals but improve the general attack of the team. So I'm not expecting massive things from him, but the first 3 fixtures, I mean, Wolves at home, Wolves have had an awful pre-season in terms of the players they've lost, their recruitment, the signs from the manager. Wolves at home in game week 1's got to be about as good a fixture as it gets. The only other fixture that's about as good as that is Nottingham Forest at home, who've also had an awful pre-season, still haven't got a goalkeeper. Barely any players fit. They got them in game week 3 as well. So it's 2 of what I think are the nicest home games they can have, where Manchester United are incredibly strong. And Spurs away, game week 2 as well. Man U have a great record of scoring goals against Spurs. These games often have massively high score lines. And again, Spurs haven't exactly had a great pre-season either. The Harry Kane saga rumbles on. They still haven't signed any centre-backs. at all. They're playing a new high pressing, high attacking system and then conceding bucket loads in that. So I just think those first three for Man U assets are really, really nice. And just having one doesn't feel like you're going to gain much, but going with two means that you can tap into any big scores.
Yeah, it's a classic turning a shield into a sword analogy, which Joe famously coined a number of years ago, because there will be people that will have just one, and that will probably grey circle them, for want of a better term, whereas you can potentially get involved in, two people involved in the same goal, get green arrows out of things that are just going to help other people stagnate.
That's the thinking. Yeah, and sometimes you need to double up when ownership is high. It's why I want to double up with the Arsenal mids, for example, because I think a lot of people are going for Jesus or up front. They're not considering some of the other Arsenal mids, and I think Odegaard, Martinelli, and I think Havertz are all really good picks to pair alongside Saka.
Doing your absolute hardest to make me talk about him next. But I mean, to be fair, it doesn't take much because he sticks out like a sore thumb, which doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing because, I actually think I love this pick because I did the scout report on him about a month ago, and I looked at a couple of the sort of the signs and the noises that were coming out of Arsenal as if to suggest, don't worry guys, we're not going to use him as a false nine anymore. He clearly doesn't like doing that. We're going to probably use him as a new Xhaka, and actually if you play in that Xhaka role, Xhaka famously was afforded the same number of big chances as Odegaard last season. So it means that those two number 8s have goal scoring potential, whoever's going to sit in that role. And so I simply said to people, don't rule him out. I went nowhere near actually owning him. And then I saw that Az has got him in his team. I was like, yes, here we go. Because then it just sort of deflects. If anybody's going to... Who's the guy who's got his name attached to Havertz? It isn't me. But if he does come off, I'm going to be like, I did say don't rule him out.
Yeah. You're a nice, unlosable position there. I envy it. But I have unfortunately put all of my eggs into this basket, and I'm going to look a right mug when I have to sell him after 2 or 3 weeks, I think.
But I mean, talk to me about why you stuck him in, because you actually appeared sort of surprised there about that little stat about Odegaard. Were you aware of the goal threat potential that came with him playing in the Xhaka role, or was there something else here?
Well, I knew obviously Xhaka got sort of an incredible amount of attacking returns from that role last year, while having to defend more because he's a defensive minded player most of the time, but he was unlocked a bit to get forward and did really well. So you've got to think, if a more attacking player is put in that role, you'd expect them to get a similar amount of chances, or even more. And Arsenal were just such a potent attacking side that really anyone in that team can get attacking return. If Granit Xhaka can suddenly become a bit of a goal scoring or assisting machine, and then I think anyone can. And I think Havertz gets a lot of stick. I've given him stick before in the past. He can go missing in games, but he was Chelsea's best performing player last season in a team that massively struggled. His conversion rate is pretty appalling, and I think he's quite easy to mark when he's in that kind of false nine role. But where he excels, for Germany, for Leverkusen, is being able to ghost into positions. And with Jesus up top, dragging players out of position, you've got the wide players who are so much more effective than any wide players that Chelsea have had in a while. I just think Havertz's ability to kind of drift and lose his markers and get into goal scoring positions and then be found out by these kind of creative players is just so much better than it was at Chelsea. And Arteta knows that there's no other reason why Arteta is paying £65 million for Kai Havertz, unless he thinks he's going to bring something to that role, which they were missing with Xhaka, because Xhaka did well, but he isn't as clever or as intelligent on the pitch as Havertz is. And B, if he doesn't think that Havertz has got the ability to score goals from that position. He hasn't brought him in to be a deep-lying playmaker. He's brought him in to be a player attacking the box from deep. We've seen players do that so effectively at other teams, at Ramsey, Toure. These players do so well for us, FPL-wise.
Well, Odegaard as well. Literally on the other side of the midfield, so they're already used to the idea of building the team around helping those two number 8s ghost in and get the goals.
Absolutely, and Arteta has a very good record of taking players who are getting a lot of stick and turning them into players who fit a system that he wants to implement and be effective. He's done it with Ben White. They paid 50 million for him. Everyone said he wasn't worth it. Key part of their team last season. Odegaard came in from Real Madrid on loan. He had an okay season, but Arteta took him to a level which I don't think anyone, including us, expected him to step up to last season. Xhaka as well. He'd been completely written off by the Arsenal fans, and then Arteta molds him into this box-to-box midfielder, which is so effective. He's taken players like Martinelli, turned them into great players. And Havertz is widely regarded, or at least he was before he went to Chelsea, as one of the most gifted players of his generation in Germany. So Arteta sees something in him. All the signs are there from him. Havertz going to Arsenal being a complete flop for £65 million in his favoured position would surprise me more than if he, went there and did really well.
Yeah, no, I think I agree. I think it's nice to see him be brought in and used to his strengths rather than perhaps maybe bent out of shape to fit a system that just doesn't benefit him. So
he's not a false nine. He's not effective in that kind of striker position. He's not clinical enough. He doesn't take his chances well enough. He hasn't got the ability to move around the pitch like he likes. And he's wasted. He's just completely wasted there, I thought.
He just doesn't really have the upper body strength to play with his back to goal. And so therefore, stick the goal in front of him and ask him to ghost in. I think he's going to do much better. And I suppose, just bringing it back to the shape and structure of your team, how wedded are you to the idea of having Havertz? I suppose you've mentioned that you're not completely sold on Bruno, and he, of course, is the same price as Ødegaard, for example. So there are ways you could tweak this, potentially. Do you see yourself doing that? You clearly obviously think that Havertz can have a good season for Arsenal, but that is just slightly different to you believe it enough to build your team around it. That's what the question is.
Yeah, I mean, this is it, right? This is how you can end up getting locked into these players, because do I think Ødegaard is a better pick than Havertz? Probably. Like, he probably is. He's just off the back of a 200-point season. He's Arsenal's captain. You haven't got to worry about his minutes. I think Havertz could be bought off. If the system needs changing, Partey's still around. They can bring him on. I would rather have Ødegaard, but obviously the million is being kind of used elsewhere. If Foden does end up going down to Mitoma, I could do Havertz up to Ødegaard, or I could, strengthen the bench and go for Ødegaard instead of Fernandes. But just because I do that doesn't mean I don't think Havertz is a bad pick. It's the same as Mitoma. I could end up starting the season not having Mitoma, but still think he's a good pick in the game. So if I don't start with Havertz, I'm going to get a lot of stick, because people are going to say, "Oh, you were talking about him all pre-season and stuff." But it's like, yeah, but I did him to Ødegaard. Like, come on. If you had to pick one of Ødegaard or Havertz, even the biggest Havertz admirers would still probably prefer the nailed-on option, an Arsenal team who's played there for longer and that kind of thing. But I genuinely do like him to pick. I'm not just saying it to be controversial. I think he's going to do well for them. He's flying under the radar. And if you need the money to save from Martinelli or Ødegaard, then I think he's worth considering.
I mean, that's the thing. It is a spicy pick, but it's not just a spicy pick for the sake of it. It's like, Az really believes in his spicy picks. Okay, just remember that. That's what he's about. I suppose the trade-off here also is no Jesus, and you've got Watkins instead. So let's just sort of slightly shift to your forwards now. We don't need to talk about Haaland, even for half a second. So Watkins over Jesus at the moment. Jesus did very well at the start of the last season, did very well towards the end of last season, missed the middle of the portion campaign with the injury. But you've not gone with him here for now. I suppose, again, it could all change because you've got Watkins who's the same price. Is this a price point-oriented pick? Or
there's absolutely no chance I'll start with Jesus.
Okay.
In the same way that I kind of taught myself into believing in Havertz, there's some players who I just have no interest in. And I'm surprised at the massive amounts of love that Jesus is getting. I think we've seen his role in the team for a year now, and his role in the team to me isn't out and out goal scorer. He hasn't got the penalties. He's a decent player playing for a very good team, but I think he disappointed last season. I think he had one big game against Leicester towards the beginning of last season, and he's kind of lived off that for the whole year. He got his injury, but he came back in the team. He wasn't as effective as he was at the start of the season. I look at him and I watch him play, and I think he's a foil a lot of the time for other players to perform. And I prefer Watkins. I prefer Nkunku, even Jackson, something like that. I think there's better forward options, and I think in midfield, I want to have two Arsenal mids. I just think they're the better picks in that Arsenal team. So if I have two Arsenal mids, I either go for the triple up with Jesus, which seems a little bit overkill. Triple up on attacks never really gone well for me. Or you go for Gabriel. The defense, who I think is a great pick as well.
The midfielder argument definitely makes a lot of sense. Can I ask you another difficult question? that's involved some stats, because I've actually been having this discussion with a lot of people this season. I'm like the opposite. I'm pretty locked into Jesus for now, and I've even had some interesting discussions with my mate who's an Arsenal fan as well. In the last 12 game weeks of last season, so that's when after Jesus came back from his injury, amongst all Arsenal players, Jesus had the highest expected goal involvement and had 7 goal involvements, which was level with Martinelli and Ødegaard, one more than Saka, and the only player who in the Arsenal team who had more goal involvements than Jesus after he came back from that injury was Trossard. Does that change your mind? Does that make you nervous, or are you going to hold your ground on this particular argument? Because I find this really fascinating, some of the stats behind this.
It is, and again, I am not saying he's a bad pick. He's a good player playing in a great team, and if you want him and you want the Arsenal striker and you believe in those stats, that's great. His stats have historically always been really, really good. But you look at his overall returns, and they are consistently not that amazing. I mean, he got 8 goals, 8 assists the season before. Okay, he was out wide for City before that. He got 9 goals the season before that. He had a really good season in 2019 where he got 14, but that was a bit of the anomaly, really. He got 7 the year before that, 7 when he first joined. This isn't a player who is consistently scoring goals. His kind of conversion rate isn't that high. And when you see him in front of goal, he never looks like a really prolific goal scorer for me. And there's certain players who are just like that. He'll get chances. He'll do okay in that system, but I don't think he's a no-brainer. Like he's in everyone's team at the moment. And I like to try and identify players who I just think aren't gonna maybe start the season that strong, or players that could drop in value because they're so high ownership. And he's the one for me. Good stats, could do well, but hasn't done historically, so I'm avoiding.
Yeah, I have to say, I think that the forward classification definitely doesn't help him, because the all of that data we just talked through I personally find it very interesting, but of course it doesn't quite factor in the fact that those midfielders are just going to get that little bit extra reward for all the different things they do, which I think is a fair point. I suppose. Well, let's spin this in a positive direction now. You haven't got Jesus, but you do have Watkins. Interestingly enough, also a player who historically has actually had issues being prolific in front of goal, and so
very true.
On the Jesus thing, it's like, was that spell at the end of last season maybe a purple patch, or has he improved? We don't know. I suppose the same question applies to Watkins. Is there something just additional with him that it makes you more convinced about him than makes you convinced about Jesus?
Well, my different what I like about Watkins is he's completely nailed on to play in the team. Jesus can be swapped out for Nketiah. He can be swapped for Trossard to play as a false 9. If things aren't going as well, I'd be very surprised if Watkins comes off because of the what he brings to the top of the pitch in terms of his work rate and his energy, and the fact that Villa don't really have any other options at striker. He's on penalties as well, which Jesus doesn't have. The fixtures are really nice. I mean, it's Newcastle away, which is obviously tough, but then I like the Everton and Burnley game, and then it's an easy switch over to Nkunku or Jackson, whichever one is looking better. I'm kind of in that. And I think in terms of pre-seasons, I think Villa have had incredible pre-season. The signings they've made, I think Diaby is going to be a big player for them as well. And Emery just knows what he's doing. They're one of the top teams from when he signed. So you're getting the talisman of the team, the chief goal threat on penalties with good fixtures, compared to Jesus, who is a cog in the Arsenal wheel. He's not the talisman of that team. He's foil, and he's a bit at risk of rotation. So I prefer Watkins to Jesus.
I mean, that certainly makes a lot of sense. Aston Villa's pre-season has looked really good. Watkins has scored twice, got a penalty against Walsall, and then also scored against Newcastle as well. He's got a lot of extra help around him as well, as you mentioned. So yeah, it's a nice pick, to be honest. I mean, I feel a bit nervous that I'm not going to have him at the start, because I can anticipate a bit of a bandwagon with him, whereas with Jesus, he is distracted. He's almost hidden. Well, he's in a lot of teams, but I don't think there's going to be a big sort of surge towards him if Arsenal start well, because the midfielders will distract the people making their transfers more. Whereas with Villa, well, I mean, Diaby probably could do that as well. But where do you find room for Diaby in a midfield at the moment when you've got all these picks from these big teams. It's hard to find a striker at United right now. You could have an Arsenal striker, but I totally understand why you wouldn't necessarily have one. So those bigger teams you want to save room for in midfield. So therefore, Watkins, you've actually got more room for in your team, even if Diaby potentially outscores him, even though it's just he's a midfielder, but you maybe can't fit him in. Do you anticipate that happening, or have you got your eye on Diaby at some point?
I like Diaby. I think he looks a really fun pick. He's going to be playing sort of out of position, probably just behind the striker. But again, a player like Diaby positively impacts a player like Watkins, because you've got to think with two speedy players up top, both know how to finish. That's more marking for other teams. That's more space for Watkins potentially, and it's going to make Villa a better outfit. And it's the pens that really sway it. I mean, Diaby's still a bit of an unknown. I think he's too risky to start the season with. We've seen players come over from Germany and other countries and struggle a bit initially. His pre-season was really good. I think he's got a couple of goals already for them. But he's still a bit of a wait and see. And they've got other options that can play there. But I'm hoping that he comes in and boosts Watkins as well. So yeah, he's still the one that I'd pick. So I think there's like you say, there's more midfielders that I'd want over Diaby. He's quite far down the list.
Well, one of those is, of course, Phil Foden, who in many ways has sort of sat there in the corner going, guys, you're going to talk about me? Because, I mean, he's slowly appearing in lots more teams now. I think people have started to be a bit less concerned about rotation at the start of the campaign, because he wasn't in my first draft, because I just sort of went to the default position of, it's Man City midfielder, it won't play. Just very simple. But then actually, when you look into how City traditionally start seasons, they don't rotate as much as usual. So are you fairly confident that you'll have Foden by the start of game week 1?
Well, it's really nice that we've got the Community Shield involving two players that I'm looking at. I mean, Havertz and Foden. I mean, there's a chance that one of them starts. There's a chance that neither of them starts. There's a chance that both of them start, and then I can kind of assess the performances, because it feels like for a player of Foden's talents, it seems a shame that he's only going to get into the Man City team because they've sold everyone else that was a threat to his position. Is he going to take the Gundogan role? Is he going to line up on the right-hand side with Mahrez going? That typically, I want to see him play a bit more, because he lost the faith of Pep last season after the World Cup and had such a strong opening to the season, and then was just sort of unceremoniously dropped and barely featured again before them. So is he now back in Pep's good books enough that Pep is going to say, well, you are now my number one player? They've got Kovacic, you can play that kind of central midfield role. Phillips as well, in his second season. Typically the players Pep signs do better in their second year. On the right-hand side, surely they're going to sign another player for the right-hand side, because they don't have anyone, really. They've got Bernardo Silva and Foden that can play on the right. Maybe Alvarez, but it's not really typically where he's lined up. They seem quite weak on that side to me. So if another player comes in the right, then that does limit Foden to that midfield role where he said he wants to play more of. So maybe that is where he's going to end up. But he's a risky one. I do think he's a risky one, because we've seen before the fact that he can get dropped and not play. So the fixtures are really nice for City in those first opening games. 2 promoted teams in the first 3 games. Again, it feels like I want to have that second Man City attacker to kind of try and tap into those. And I think Foden is the preferred one at the moment, unless we see Alvarez start at the weekend. And then I think 6.5 for Alvarez, if we think he's going to get regular starts at the start of the season, is going to be a bit of a differential, and it could be a bit of a gem.
Well, so Alvarez has been sort of touted by some as potentially the Gundogan replacement, which feels a bit odd when you on the surface. But when you have a look at some of the performances they've had, he was sometimes operating in that sort of additional number 8/false 9 position that was very some kind of weird kind of floaty version of both combined at the same time, and was getting attacking returns from that. I suppose if he ends up being the one in that position, that could maybe mean some surgery. Perhaps would you go 3 forwards, or would you downgrade Watkins and spend the money elsewhere?
Yeah, I don't know. It's tricky. I mean, the obvious thing to do is, if I think Foden's too big of a doubt, I'd just do Foden down to Mitoma. I mean, Mitoma is the one that's kind of like just on the outskirts of my thinking with this team, and I'm not totally set on going without him. So, we could see Foden down to Mitoma and then Havertz up to Odegaard. I think I'm fairly content with the rest of the team. The other option is to move Foden down to Mitoma and then strengthen kind of another position. I mean, I could move Mbamba up to João Pedro for example, at 5.5. Put a bit more money in some of these, subs that I've got, Baldock and Kabore, and try and take those up. So the money that I could use from Foden would be quite useful. I definitely want to have those two Arsenal mids. So that Havertz position is either going to be Havertz or Odegaard. It'd be one of those two for sure. But the Foden one could be anyone. It could be Alvarez if he looks good for 6.5 up front. It could be Mitoma. That's my kind of thinking with that. Watkins could be Nkunku. Maybe I just go with that. But then it's the two Chelsea players. I'm still a bit unsure about those. So I'll probably start with Watkins and then downgrade if I need to.
What I like about that is that you're not ruling out involvement in the Brighton attack, and bearing in mind your allegiances to the club and the many friends you have, of course, also support the same club. It's very much going to be like the prodigal son returning home. Look who came crawling back to Mitoma after Foden wasn't the one. God, well, I suppose
I'd love to start with Ferguson. I mean, Ferguson is the one that I had in kind of all my early preseason drafts, because I think this is going to be a massive season for him. I think he could get 15 goals for us. I think he's going to cement that position, over Welbeck, and I think Undav looks like he's leaving. I think João Pedro plays a bit off him, similar to the role that maybe Diaby's going to have at Villa. And I think Ferguson's going to do well, but he's just too risky to start with because he just has barely featured in pre-season, and Welbeck's looked really sharp. So you can't start a player just because you think they're going to do well at some point in the season without the guarantees that they're going to play. So he's the one that I really wanted to start with, but can't. So kind of feels like maybe I'm just getting Mitoma to, kind of, what's the word? Cover the Brighton attack.
The dreaded C word.
Well, exactly. When in reality, maybe he's not in isolation. Maybe he's not the best FPL pick.
Yeah. Well, on the same subject of players who, we're maybe not sure about, because with that risk still around Foden, the one thing we haven't really talked about there with the Man City attack is there isn't really a challenger to Grealish on the other side. So I suppose you're of the view that you want two Man City attackers. And it's interesting because I'm not seeing Grealish in any teams, but if you are of the view you want two Man City attackers and you're not sure that Foden starts, or maybe we think he's going to get kind of swapped in and out with an Alvarez, would any of that make you consider Grealish at all?
Yeah, I mean, Foden is a kind of a risk to Grealish, I guess, because Foden has operated on the left quite regularly for Man City as well. So we might see a bit of rotation between those. Grealish is a funny one. I mean, I love him as a player. He's one of my favourite players in the league, but his role at City, I just don't think is a good FPL option. He plays too wide at times, doesn't always get into the most dangerous areas. He played pretty much every minute of last season and got 15 attacking returns. I think that's disappointing for a player of his quality playing in such a strong City team. I expected him to get 20, 25 or something like that, but I just don't think he's really someone who we can rely on for kind of consistent returns. Again, he's not a bad option. It's Grealish. They've got two promoted teams in the first three. He could get a double digit in any of those games. But he's probably not someone I'm looking at. I just can't get over the fact that surely he's how fit is he going into this season? He's just, I know he's been playing some of the preseason games. He's a professional athlete, and but he's the one player in that City team that I just think, has he really been training at full capacity? Has he really been doing everything that Pep demands of his players all preseason to get him fit enough to play 90 across all those games? I'm not sure. If he starts in the Community Shield, looks good, then it might be a different story. But I'm holding fire on him for now.
I think one of the lasting memes of the summer was someone pitching the idea for the Hangover 4, but it stars Jack Grealish and it's John Stones and Kyle Walker simply just trying to get Jack Grealish to England training. Like that's the story of the movie. That'd be great, as Jack would say.
I'd watch that. That sounds good.
I really would watch that. Well, we've got only a couple of minutes left before you got to shoot off, so let's quickly talk about your defence, which we haven't actually touched on at all. So we may have to sort of do a bit of a helicopter view here. But you got Steele, Chilwell, Shaw, Gabriel, Baldock, and I think Kabore are your five. You got 2-4 million. So my guess is here you just want three guys that you're always going to start. You're not that interested in a rotation.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's game week 4 when Manchester United play Arsenal. That maybe you don't want to play both of those defenders, but actually Baldock and Kabore both have decent fixtures in that. Baldock's got Everton at home. Kabore's got West Ham at home. I think so. I could bench one of those for those, but realistically, I think Arsenal are going to be a strong defensive unit with Rice signing. I think Shaw gives you bonus potential and attacking potential as well. And Chilwell, if he's on set pieces, he's just someone you play in every game. I really like those 3 picks. I like Stones as well at 5-5. And I think that is enough for me not to consider Trent, for example, because with the fixtures as they are at the start, I know Gameweek 2 is amazing, but I just think Chilwell, Shaw, and Gabriel is a really nice back three. And you could swap any of those out for Stones if you wanted to cover the Man City defence. Steele's an interesting one because I know people are worried about Verbruggen and his kind of role, but I'm just not worried about him. I just cannot see any way in which a 20-year-old signs from another country and for a really demanding Derby, kind of team where playing out of the back is so crucial and so important. And Steele has been doing that now for 6-7 months, has looked great pre-season. Why on earth would he risk, disrupting that when we're already maybe losing Casado and we've already lost Colwill? He's going to want to keep a little bit of consistency at the start of the season. I just can't see any way in which Steele doesn't start the season for us, and he'd have to do something pretty dramatic to lose that spot, I think.
Yeah, well, and I suppose the other thing, of course, with Verbruggen is that he, in many ways, could be seen as the European goalkeeper, as in both literally in terms of he is European and he is a goalkeeper, but also playing in Europe, which he has done more of than Steele has, basically.
Absolutely, and he's a young goalkeeper. He's got loads of potential. He's so highly rated, and he will come in and usurp Steele at some point, but still has to give him a reason to do that. You don't just mess around with your goalkeeper unless they're making mistakes or you've had a falling out with them like he did with Sanchez. There's absolutely no reason to take Steele out of the Brighton team at the moment. He is better for the system than Verbruggen is at the moment. So to take him out for a 20-year-old newly signed goalkeeper would be a massive statement from De Zerbi that he just won't do it. He just won't do that at the start of the season. So still safe.
Yeah. I suppose one last final question then is rotation with Areola. I suppose we've got to see if Areola is going to be the starting goalkeeper first, but we think that he might be. Rotation there or set and forget on Steele? Set
and forget. I think I hate rotating goalkeepers. It never goes well. You always end up benching a player who gets a 10 points. I had Henderson and Ward. Henderson and Ward last season. I mean, two pretty how I ended up with those two is a mystery, but I was rotating those for the better fixtures and got it wrong every week. Leicester randomly kept a clean sheet and Ward got 10 points. Next week, Henderson got a clean sheet against Liverpool or whoever it was and gets 10, 12 points. It happens all the time. So set and forget 4.5 keepers. That's always how I'd like to play FPL.
As you say, like De Zerbi, why have a falling out with your goalkeeper when you could just leave him in the team, setting the tone, and asking you no difficult questions? Unlike me, who asked you loads today. But thank you very much, of course, Az, for answering those to the best of your ability. It's been great fun having you around. One last just little plug for the members area. If you've not signed up, make sure you get your membership sorted. Up to 30% you can save with those pre-season prices. All sorts of good stuff, which you can see on the screen right now. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the Fantasy Football Scout YouTube channel. That lets us know exactly the kind of content you want us to make, because it's the ones with the most likes. So make sure that you do that on the stuff that you like. Maybe not this one, but perhaps the other stuff.
My ego doesn't need it. Yeah.
We don't want to make his head any bigger.
Give Ed's video a few likes. That'll cheer him up.
That's the way to go. But yeah, thanks, Az. That's everything from me. And this is anything you'd like to add before the start of the season?
No, all good. I look forward to the inevitable abuse I get when I don't start the season with Havertz and he scores a brace game week 1 and I'm getting tagged. Did you go with it? And I'm like, nope, obviously I didn't. Obviously I switched him to Odegaard, who got taken off on a stretcher after 20 minutes or whatever it was. That's normally what tends to happen with these things. But yeah, I don't know what this team's going to end up looking like. I do like this team. I think the team is the team's strong and the bench is obviously a joke, but Baldock and Kabore actually look fairly decent options. I think, both at wing back, both nailed on to start. I don't really want to be messing around with too much rotation. So I think they're fine.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I do like the team. It's got a bit of uniqueness to it. It's got a bit of character, so it's got all that as good stuff, but also ticks a lot of boxes to make sure that you're not going to be left too far adrift if those spicy picks turn out to just be bland potatoes. So,
exactly.
Yeah, I think it looks good. It looks good. Well, with that, I shall leave you fine, folks, to enjoy the rest of your FPL tinkering, and we shall see you next time.